The bus pulled into the dusty lot, its brakes hissing loudly in the morning air. The sun had barely risen, yet the military base was already alive with activity. Soldiers in uniform moved with precision. Drills echoed across the training fields, and the faint sound of orders carried on the wind. From inside the bus, a young woman sat quietly, gripping the strap of her duffel bag. Her name was Private Elena Martinez, 21 years old, fresh out of training school, and now reporting for her first assignment. She stepped off the bus, the desert heat instantly pressing down on her. The sight before her was intimidating, the endless rows of barracks, the towering flag waving proudly above, and the unmistakable aura of discipline that wrapped around the place like armor. For many, it was simply another base. For her, it was the stage where she would prove her worth. She knew the odds were stacked against her. Women in the military faced constant scrutiny, and whispers often followed them wherever they went. Her presence, though entirely earned, would be questioned. But Elena was no stranger to doubt. She had grown up in a small town where people told her she'd never make it out. Each time she proved them wrong, and this would be no different. Her first day began with orientation, the usual barrage of paperwork, safety briefings, and introductions to commanding officers. She stood at attention, her eyes sharp, refusing to show nerves. Yet even in these early moments, she could feel the weight of stares. Some were curious, others skeptical. She ignored them. What mattered was discipline, and she was determined to embody it. It wasn't long before she encountered him, the man whose shadow loomed over the base. Colonel Richard Harlan. His reputation had reached her long before she arrived. He was a decorated officer, a veteran of multiple deployments, and known for his ruthless discipline. Soldiers feared him, not out of respect, but out of survival. Those who crossed him found themselves broken, either in spirit or in career. When he first approached her, she felt the air shift. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with piercing blue eyes, the colonel radiated authority. But beneath his sharp uniform and controlled demeanor, there was something darker, something that didn't align with honor or service. "So you're the new recruit," he said, his voice low, laced with skepticism. He scanned her from head to toe, as though assessing whether she even belonged in his world. "Private Martinez, you look fragile." The words cut, not because they were true, but because they were designed to sting. Elena locked eyes with him, refusing to drop her gaze. "With respect, sir," she replied firmly, "I wouldn't be here if I couldn't handle it." A small smirk flickered across his face. He didn't respond, only nodded slightly before walking away. But she knew instantly this was the beginning of something dangerous. The days that followed were grueling. The colonel made a point of singling her out during drills. While others ran laps, she was forced to run double. When rifles were inspected, hers was scrutinized twice as harshly. Mistakes by others were overlooked, but hers were magnified, dissected, and thrown back at her with cutting remarks. "Too slow, Martinez," he barked one morning as she crawled under barbed wire during an obstacle course. "You think the enemy will wait for you to catch your breath?" Her lungs burned, her muscles screamed, but she pressed forward, clenching her teeth against his insults. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. By the second week, the entire base had noticed. Whispers spread among the soldiers. Some pitied her, others admired her stubbornness. A few even warned her to watch her back. "He's not just tough," one whispered in the mess hall. "He enjoys crushing people. Don't give him a reason." But Elena didn't need the warning. She already felt the storm brewing. Each day under his command was a battle, not just of strength, but of endurance. His words were weapons, aimed to erode her confidence. Yet strangely, with each blow, her resolve grew stronger. One evening after drills, she sat on her bunk, sore and exhausted. Her roommate, Private Jenkins, leaned against the frame, watching her. "You don't flinch," Jenkins said quietly. "Everyone else avoids him, but you stare him down. Why?" Elena shrugged, though inside she knew the answer clearly. "Because bullies thrive on fear. If I show him fear, I lose. If I stand tall, maybe I win." But winning against Colonel Harlan wasn't that simple. His power stretched across every corner of the base. He was untouchable, or so it seemed. And Elena was just one soldier among hundreds. Still, there was a fire in her chest that refused to go out. She had come here to serve, to prove her worth, and no man, not even a colonel, would stop her. The tension between them only grew. During morning formations, his eyes always found her. During drills, his commands were sharpest when directed at her. It was a game of pressure, a cruel test designed to break her spirit. But what the colonel didn't realize was that Elena was not easily broken. She had endured too much in life already: poverty, doubt, the weight of being underestimated at every turn. His cruelty, while cutting, was just another obstacle in her path. Still, beneath her strong exterior, she felt unease. She could sense it in the way his gaze lingered too long, in the way his smirk carried something more than authority. His treatment of her wasn't just about discipline, it was personal. And deep inside, Elena knew it was only a matter of time before his cruelty crossed a line. The first day at the base was supposed to be a beginning, a chance to build her future. Instead, it became the start of a war she hadn't expected. Not a war fought with weapons on foreign soil, but a war fought in silence, in whispers, in power abused behind closed doors. She tightened her fists, staring at the ceiling of her barracks that night. She told herself one thing over and over: "I will not let him break me." And with that promise, the storm began to brew. From the very first week, Colonel Richard Harlan made it his personal mission to remind Private Elena Martinez of her place. What started as harsher drills soon grew into deliberate acts of intimidation. Every soldier at the base could see it, but no one dared to comment aloud. Harlan's shadow was long, and his authority was absolute. Morning formations became his stage. While other soldiers received quick inspections, Elena's uniform was scrutinized for every imagined flaw. A slightly wrinkled sleeve, a misplaced thread, tiny imperfections that others would never be faulted for, became fuel for his tirades. "Pathetic presentation, Martinez," he sneered one morning, circling her like a predator. "Is this how you honor the uniform? Sloppy, weak. If you can't even dress yourself properly, how do you expect to serve your country?" The soldiers standing beside her froze, eyes fixed forward. They wanted to intervene, but none dared. Challenging the colonel was unthinkable. Later that day, on the training field, he found another chance. During rifle drills, he snatched her weapon from her hands, disassembling it with practiced ease. "Slow, Martinez." "Too slow," he said loudly, his voice carrying across the squad. "By the time you have this rifle ready, the enemy would have buried you 6 feet under. Maybe soldiering isn't for you. Maybe you belong back in the kitchen." The sting of his words echoed in the silence that followed. Some soldiers bit their lips, others shifted uncomfortably, but none spoke up. Elena, however, stood tall. Her eyes didn't waver, even as humiliation burned in her chest. She refused to give him the reaction he wanted. But his cruelty was never just about words. It was about dominance, about reminding her every chance he got that he had the power to crush her spirit. One evening during endurance training, he ordered her to run laps long after the rest of the squad had finished. The sky turned dark, and her legs screamed for rest, but he kept her going. "Faster, Martinez. Don't stop until I say so," he barked, watching her struggle. "Let's see if you can last longer than your pride." By the time she staggered to a halt, her uniform soaked in sweat. He leaned in close and whispered so only she could hear, "You'll break?" "They all do." Those words stayed with her long into the night. Alone on her bunk, she stared at the ceiling, fighting the anger rising in her chest. She wasn't just battling exhaustion. She was battling humiliation, the gnawing doubt that perhaps he was right. Maybe she would break. But deep inside, another voice answered, "Not me. Not this time." The intimidation spread beyond drills. In the mess hall, she could feel his eyes watching her. During briefings, his comments found subtle ways to undermine her credibility. Even when she wasn't the focus, his presence was suffocating, a constant reminder that he could strike at any moment. Other soldiers noticed. Some offered quiet words of encouragement when no one was watching. "Hang in there," one whispered as they passed in the corridor. "Don't let him win." But others kept their distance, afraid that being too close to her would make them his next target. She understood their silence. It wasn't cowardice. It was survival. Harlan had built his authority on fear, and no one wanted to stand in the line of fire. One day, during a tactical exercise, he pushed her further than ever. They were simulating a battlefield scenario, crawling through mud under barbed wire while explosions thundered around them. Elena kept her focus, pulling herself forward inch by inch, but Harlan's voice pierced the chaos. "Slower than a damn snail, Martinez. Move." She forced herself faster, mud caking her uniform, her arms trembling with strain. Then, halfway through, he stepped into her path, blocking the way. The squad behind her froze, unsure what to do. "Look at you," he mocked, towering over her. "Pathetic. Struggling like a child. Do you honestly think you belong here? You're an embarrassment to this unit." Elena lifted her head, meeting his eyes through the mud streaked across her face. And though every part of her body screamed to collapse, she pushed forward, crawling right past his boots without flinching. The squad behind her erupted into movement again, silently inspired by her defiance. Harlan's face darkened, his jaw tightening. He hadn't expected her to ignore him so completely. That moment sparked something in the others. Whispers began spreading through the base about her resilience, about how she refused to break under his abuse. Soldiers who once looked at her with doubt began to watch her with quiet admiration. They didn't dare say it aloud, but they felt it. She was stronger than anyone realized. And that only enraged the colonel further. Late one night, as she returned from latrine duty, she found him waiting in the corridor. The barracks were quiet, the hall dimly lit. He stepped into her path, his expression cold. "You think you're clever, Martinez?" he asked, his voice low, almost calm. "You think standing tall makes you strong? Let me be clear. I own this base. I own everyone on it. You can stand as tall as you want, but when I decide to crush you, no one will stop me." Her heart pounded, but she didn't step back. "With respect, sir," she said evenly, "strength isn't about crushing people. It's about standing when someone tries." For a moment, silence hung between them. His eyes narrowed, and a slow smile crept across his face. "We'll see how long you keep standing." And with that, he walked away, leaving her in the empty corridor, shaken but unbroken. By now, she understood his game. He wasn't simply testing her abilities. He was determined to destroy her. To him, she wasn't a soldier. She was a threat to his authority, a reminder that his power wasn't absolute. What he didn't know was that every insult, every punishment, every act of intimidation only fueled her determination. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was watching, waiting, preparing for the moment when his cruelty would go too far. Because deep down, Elena knew something with absolute certainty. The colonel would push her until he crossed a line. And when that happened, she would be ready. The night was heavy with silence. The bass had settled into its usual rhythm of quiet after lights out. Faint footsteps on patrol, the distant hum of generators, and the occasional bark of a drill sergeant echoing somewhere across the compound. For most soldiers, it was a moment of rest, a chance to let exhaustion sink into sleep. But for Private Elena Martinez, rest was elusive. She sat on her bunk, tying her boots tighter than necessary, trying to push away the unease gnawing in her chest. Weeks of intimidation had sharpened her instincts, and tonight something felt off. She was right. When the barracks emptied for late-night duties, Colonel Harlan found her alone. His shadow filled the doorway before she even heard his footsteps. The sight of him there, expression cold, eyes glinting with something darker than authority, sent a chill down her spine. "Private Martinez," he said, his voice deceptively calm. "Still awake? Good. We need to have a little talk." Her pulse quickened, but she kept her face composed. "Sir, it's late. If this is about drills, we can address it tomorrow." A thin smile curved his lips, but it wasn't kind. "Tomorrow won't do. You need to learn your place now." He stepped closer, his presence suffocating. Before she could react, his hand clamped down on her shoulder, iron strong. He dragged her toward the latrine at the end of the corridor, his grip unrelenting. The room was empty, the smell of disinfectant sharp in the air. The fluorescent light flickered above, casting shadows that made the space feel smaller, colder. "Sir, this isn't appropriate," Elena began, her voice steady though her heart hammered. But before she could finish, his hand shoved her forward. She stumbled, catching herself on the sink, but he was already behind her. With cruel force, he pressed her down, slamming her head toward the toilet. The shock of cold porcelain against her face was immediate, humiliating. Panic surged as water splashed, seeping into her hair, her uniform. His laughter low, mocking echoed in the tiled room. "You think you can stand against me?" He growled, holding her down. "You're nothing. You'll break just like the rest. This is where you belong." For a moment, Elena felt the edges of despair closing in. The sting of humiliation cut deeper than the physical act itself. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts as water trickled down her neck. He was stronger, outranking her in every way, and there was no one to call for help. But as quickly as the despair came, something else rose to the surface rage. Not the wild, reckless kind, but a fire-controlled, focused. This was not the end. She refused to let it be. Her training kicked in. With all her strength, she twisted her body, slamming her elbow into his side. He grunted, momentarily loosening his grip. She tore herself free, stumbling back, soaked and shaking, but no longer cornered. She straightened slowly, wiping water from her face, and locked eyes with him. Her breathing was heavy, her body trembling, but her voice was clear when she spoke. "You made a mistake, sir." The words hung in the air like a challenge. He sneered, trying to mask the flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Mistake? You don't understand, Martinez. I can bury you with a single word. No one will believe you." But Elena wasn't listening to his threats anymore. Something had shifted inside her in that instant. He hadn't broken her. He had forged her. The humiliation, the cruelty, the attempt to strip her of dignity had instead hardened her resolve. She didn't lash out again. She didn't scream or cry. Instead, she stood taller, her wet uniform clinging to her, her fists clenched at her sides. And for the first time, she saw it fear, faint but real, flickering behind his confident mask. Because he realized something too. She wasn't broken. She was stronger. Without another word, she walked past him, her boots squelching on the wet floor. Each step echoed in defiance, louder than any scream. She didn't look back, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her shaken. Back in the barracks, she sat on her bunk, water dripping onto the floor, her hands still trembling. The room was empty, but she whispered aloud, as if promising herself, "This ends now." That night, sleep didn't come. Her mind replayed the moment over and over, the cold porcelain, his laughter, the burning humiliation. But with each replay, her resolve grew. She knew she couldn't confront him directly. Not yet. His rank shielded him. His reputation made him untouchable. So she would be smart, careful, strategic. She remembered the whispers from other soldiers' stories half told, confessions whispered only when no one else was listening. She wasn't his first victim. She wouldn't be his last unless she did something about it. The breaking point wasn't the toilet, or his hands, or even the shame. The breaking point was realizing that silence meant surrender. If she said nothing, he won. If she stayed quiet, his shadow would keep swallowing others. Elena wasn't going to let that happen. The next morning, she walked into formation as if nothing had happened. Her uniform was clean, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. But inside, the fire burned hotter than ever. She caught his eye across the yard. He smirked, as if daring her to fight. She didn't smirk back. She didn't flinch. She simply stared, silent, unbroken. And for the first time, he looked unsettled. What Colonel Harlan didn't know was that his greatest weapon, humiliation, had backfired. He hadn't crushed her spirit. He had unleashed it. The war between them had just changed. The base returned to its usual rhythm the next morning, but for Elena, everything had changed. She moved through drills, formations, and duties with her same sharp discipline. But beneath the surface, she was no longer the same soldier. The colonel thought he had humiliated her into silence. Instead, he had pushed her into clarity. If she confronted him now, she'd lose. His rank, his reputation, and the culture of fear surrounding him gave him armor thicker than steel. One accusation from a private wouldn't stand against a decorated colonel. He would bury her, just as he threatened. But she had time, and time was a weapon. Elena knew she couldn't outmatch his authority, but she could outsmart it. That night, she pulled a notebook from her duffel bag, the kind given to recruits for taking tactical notes. Instead, she used it to begin building a record. Every insult, every punishment, every deviation from protocol, she wrote them down with precision. Dates, times, places, witnesses. Facts too sharp to dismiss as imagination. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Over the following weeks, she grew quiet, not broken, but calculating. She did her drills without complaint, endured his humiliations with an unreadable expression, and pretended to swallow her pride. On the surface, she seemed subdued, maybe even beaten. But in reality, she was watching, waiting, and collecting. Others began to notice the shift. Private Jenkins, her roommate, whispered one night after lights out, "You don't fight back anymore. You just take it." Why? Elena glanced at her, lowering her voice to a near whisper. "Because I'm done reacting. I'm listening now. Paying attention. He's not invincible, Jenkins." "Nobody is." Jenkins frowned, confused, but she didn't press. She had seen the fire in Helena's eyes enough to know this wasn't surrender. It was strategy. The first crack in the colonel's armor came unexpectedly. One evening, in the mess hall, Helena overheard two corporals whispering at a corner table. She caught fragments. Harlan. 3 months ago. Made her run till she collapsed. The tone wasn't admiration, it was disgust. Elena waited until later that night, then approached one of them quietly. "I couldn't help overhearing," she said carefully. "What happened?" The corporal froze, glancing around nervously. "Forget it, Martinez. Don't repeat what you heard." "I won't," she promised. "But you're not the only one." He's been targeting people. Not just me. There was a long pause before the corporal sighed. He pushed Private Lee so hard during training last year that she ended up in the infirmary for weeks. They hushed it up, said it was heat stroke, but we all knew better. Elena's pen was already ready. She jotted down every detail the corporal reluctantly shared. Another piece of the puzzle. From then on, she became a quiet collector of stories. She listened in the mess hall, in the barracks, in the training fields. Sometimes she asked questions. Other times, she simply absorbed what people whispered when they thought no one was listening. Slowly, a picture began to form. The colonel's abuse wasn't an isolated case. It was a pattern. And once she had a pattern, she had something undeniable. Of course, gathering information came with risks. The colonel was no fool. He noticed her silence, the way she no longer reacted to his barbs. He noticed her calm eyes, even when he tried to provoke her. It unsettled him. One afternoon, after drills, he cornered her in front of the squad. "Martinez," he barked. "You think you're clever, don't you? Walking around with that smug face. You think I don't see it?" The soldier stiffened, sensing the tension. Elena snapped to attention, her expression neutral. "No, sir," she replied firmly. His eyes narrowed. "Don't play games with me. I'll find your weakness, Martinez. Everyone has one." But she didn't flinch. She simply held his gaze until he turned away, frustrated. Inside, her heart pounded, but outwardly, she gave him nothing. She had learned that silence could be sharper than words. Later that night, Jenkins whispered nervously, "You're playing with fire." "Fire's the only thing that scares a wolf," Elena answered softly. Weeks turned into months. Her notebook grew thicker with notes, testimonies, and dates. Some soldiers began to trust her enough to share their stories outright. One even slipped her a copy of a medical report that didn't match the official narrative. Bit by bit, she built a case stronger than any single accusation. Yet it wasn't just about collecting evidence. Elena also studied him, his habits, his temper, the cracks in his control. She noticed how he lost his cool when ignored, how his rage spiked when challenged subtly, but not directly. She noticed the way some officers avoided him, even those technically his equals. He wasn't respected, he was feared. And fear, she realized, was fragile. Still, the burden weighed on her. There were nights when the humiliation replayed in her mind, when she questioned whether she was strong enough to see it through. But each time, she remembered the toilet, the cold porcelain, his laughter. That memory burned away the doubt. The moment that solidified her resolve came unexpectedly. A young recruit approached her quietly after evening drills. He couldn't have been more than 19, nervous and fresh-faced. "Private Martinez?" he asked softly. "Yes." His eyes darted around before he spoke. "I saw what he did to you. I didn't say anything. I'm sorry. But if you ever need someone to back you up, I will." Elena felt a lump form in her throat. For weeks she had carried the weight alone, but now she realized something. Others were watching, waiting for someone to take the first step. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she thought. That night, she wrote a single line in her notebook, underlined twice. Strength isn't standing alone. It's giving others the courage to stand too. The colonel believed silence would protect him. But silence was breaking. Elena kept her head down, her strategy quiet, her resolve sharp. She knew the day was coming when she would take her evidence forward, when whispers would turn into voices, and when the walls around the colonel would finally crack. But for now, she waited. Patience was her weapon, and she wielded it well. The storm was gathering, and when it broke, it wouldn't just be her fight. It would be the entire base's. The winter air around the base was sharp, the kind that seemed to slice to fatigues and settle into the bones. Soldiers moved briskly from one task to another, their breaths visible in the frosty morning light. Elena carried herself as she always had, head high, posture perfect, every action precise. But inside, she carried more than determination. She carried a decision. For months she had gathered notes, testimonies, and whispers. Her notebook had become a weapon of its own, thick with dates, names, and stories. Still, it wasn't enough to topple a colonel. The military didn't bend easily, and one misstep could mean court-martial or worse. But Elena knew she had to move. Waiting forever would only give him more chances to break someone else. The chance came one evening after drills. A captain named Andrews, a stern but fair officer with a reputation for integrity, was supervising the training field. Elena had watched him for weeks, quietly assessing. He wasn't close to the colonel. He didn't seem afraid of him either. Most importantly, he listened when soldiers spoke, even the lowest-ranked privates. That night, as the others filed back to the barracks, Elena approached him. Her voice was steady, though her pulse hammered in her ears. "Captain Andrews, sir," she said, saluting. He returned the gesture. "At ease, Private Martinez." "What is it?" She hesitated, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. Then she spoke. "Sir, I need to speak with you about misconduct. Serious misconduct. By Colonel Harlan." The captain's eyes flickered, but his expression remained unreadable. "That's a heavy claim. You understand what you're saying?" "Yes, sir. And I have documentation, witnesses, records." She tapped the notebook tucked under her arm. Andrews studied her for a long moment before replying. "This isn't a conversation we can have out here. Meet me in my office at 2100 hours, discreetly." Elena nodded, relief and fear swirling together. This was it. The bold move. That night, she slipped quietly through the base, her notebook pressed to her chest like a lifeline. She half expected to be intercepted, for the colonel to somehow know what she was doing, to appear from the shadows and drag her back into silence. But she made it to Andrew's office unchallenged. The captain was waiting, the lamp on his desk casting sharp shadows across the room. He gestured for her to sit. "All right, Private. Let's hear it." Elena opened the notebook. She didn't launch into accusations. Instead, she laid out the facts like a strategist presenting a battle plan. Dates, times, orders that deviated from standard protocol, witnesses who could verify what she recorded, medical records that contradicted official reports, and finally, her own account, the humiliation, the punishment, the violence. Andrews listened in silence, occasionally scribbling notes, occasionally leaning back with a furrowed brow. When she finished, the silence stretched. "Martinez," he said finally, "if even half of this is accurate, it paints a damning picture. But you understand the risk. Going after a colonel isn't the same as disciplining a recruit. He has friends, influence." "I know, sir," Elena replied firmly. "But he also has victims. More than just me. He's a danger to the soldiers under his command. If we stay silent, we're complicit." The captain's eyes held hers for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right. I'll take this to the Inspector General. Quietly. But we need more than notes in a journal. We need statements. People willing to put their names to this. Are your witnesses prepared to do that?" Elena swallowed. "Some are afraid. But I believe they'll speak if they know they're not alone." Andrews leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Then that's where we start. Get me 3 soldiers who will stand with you. Solid testimonies. If we have that, I can push this forward." Elena left his office with her notebook clutched tight, her heart pounding. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. The following week was delicate. She couldn't just approach people openly. If word got back to the colonel, it could destroy everything. Instead, she chose carefully, speaking in whispers, finding the right moments when trust outweighed fear. Private Jenkins was the first. Elena had shared her secret planning with a roommate from the start, but now she needed more. One night after lights out, Elena leaned close and whispered, "Jenkins, I need you to put it in writing. What you saw, what you've heard. Captain Andrews will protect us, but I can't do this alone." Jenkins hesitated, fear flashing in her eyes. "Elena, if he finds out." "He won't," Elena promised. "Not if we stand together. But if we stay quiet, he wins. He'll keep hurting people." There was a long silence before Jenkins finally nodded. "All right, I'll do it." Next was Corporal Rivera, the one who had told her about Private Lee's collapse. Rivera was skeptical at first, shaking his head. "You're playing with your career, Martinez. Maybe your life." "So are you," Elena countered. "Every time you let him get away with it, you risk the next recruit collapsing or worse. This isn't about me anymore. It's about all of us." Her conviction swayed him. By the end of the conversation, Rivera agreed. The third was the young recruit who had approached her weeks earlier, offering to back her up. He didn't hesitate. "I'll speak. He scares me, but not as much as letting this go on." With 3 statements secured, Elena returned to Captain Andrews. He reviewed them carefully, his expression grave. "This is enough to start a formal inquiry," he said. "But once this moves forward, things will get ugly. Harlan will fight back. He'll try to discredit you, punish you, maybe worse. Are you ready for that?" Elena's voice was steady. "I've been ready since the day he shoved my head into that toilet. He thought he broke me. He didn't." The inquiry began quietly, but rumors spread quickly through the base. Soldiers whispered in hallways, in mess lines, in the barracks. The colonel, once untouchable, now moved with a shadow of suspicion trailing him. His temper grew shorter, his punishments harsher. He seemed to sense the ground shifting beneath his boots. One evening, during drills, he barked Elena's name. She stepped forward, standing at attention. "You think you're clever, don't you?" His voice was low but venomous. "You think your little games will change anything? I built this base. I've broken better soldiers than you." Elena met his gaze without flinching. For the first time, there was no fear. "Then you underestimated me, sir." Gasps rippled through the squad. Silence fell, heavy and electric. The colonel's face darkened, but before he could respond, Captain Andrews appeared at the edge of the field. "Colonel Harlan," he called, his voice firm. "You're needed in headquarters. Immediately." The colonel stiffened, glaring at Elena one last time before marching off. The soldiers exchanged glances, whispers bubbling at their lips. Something was happening. Something big. That night, as Elena sat in her bunk, Jenkins whispered, "You really did it, didn't you? You started the storm." Elena closed her notebook for the last time. "No," she said softly. "We did, together." A bold move had been made. There was no turning back now. The battle lines were drawn, not on a field with rifles and drills, but in offices, testimonies, and courage. And Elena Martinez was ready to see it through. The days following Captain Andrews' intervention were thick with unease. The base, once unified under strict discipline, now hummed with whispers. Soldiers exchanged furtive glances in the mess hall. Conversations hushed when footsteps approached. No one said it outright, but everyone knew something was happening between Private Martinez and Colonel Harlan. And the colonel knew it too. His usual sharp commands grew harsher. Punishments became more brutal, inspections unreasonably strict. He seemed determined to reassert his dominance by crushing anyone who dared waver. Yet beneath his thunderous exterior, there was a flicker of desperation. Fear had crept into the cracks of his authority, and Elena could see it. Still, fear made him dangerous. One afternoon, Elena was summoned to headquarters. 2 military police stood at the door as she entered, their presence making her chest tighten. Inside, Colonel Harlan sat behind his desk, his jaw clenched, papers spread before him. Captain Andrews was present too, standing stiffly at the side, his face unreadable. "Private Martinez," Harlan said coldly, not looking up. "You're accused of insubordination, spreading false rumors, and attempting to undermine command. Serious charges." Her stomach dropped. This was his counterattack. He wasn't waiting for the inquiry to take its course. He was moving to destroy her first. "With all due respect, sir," Elena said firmly, "those accusations are false." Harlan finally looked up, his eyes sharp as blades. "Do you think this is a game? Do you think you can smear my name and walk away unscathed? You're a private, Martinez. Nothing. I can end your career with a single signature." The MPs shifted uncomfortably, their eyes flicking toward Andrews. But Andrews spoke before Elena could. "Colonel, with respect, regulations require evidence for such charges. I've reviewed Martinez's record. Her service has been exemplary." "Exemplary?" Harlan barked, standing abruptly. "She's a disgrace. A liar. She's poisoned this unit with her defiance." Elena's pulse thundered, but she kept her voice steady. "Or maybe I've shown others that fear doesn't last forever." The colonel's face darkened with fury. For a heartbeat, Elena thought he might strike her then and there. But instead, he pointed sharply at the MPs. "Escort her to holding. Let's see how brave she is behind locked doors." Andrews stepped forward. "Colonel, that's not procedure. She hasn't been formally charged. If you attempt to detain her without due process, it will be noted in the ongoing investigation." The word investigation hung in the air like a blade. Harlan froze, his lips curling into a sneer. "Careful, Captain. You're skating on thin ice." But he didn't give the order. Instead, he sat back down, his glare fixed on Elena. "Dismissed." She saluted sharply and left, her heart pounding. It was clear now. He wasn't just fighting for control of the base. He was fighting for his survival. And survival made men reckless. That night, the barracks buzzed. Everyone had heard. Some soldiers looked at Elena with awe, others with fear, and a few with resentment. For years, the colonel had been untouchable, a looming figure of power. To see a private challenge him, it unsettled them. Private Jenkins leaned close as they sat on their bunks. "He's trying to break you, Elena. He'll twist every rule, every regulation." "Are you sure you can beat him?" Elena stared at her notebook, now filled with more than just notes. It was filled with courage, hope, defiance. "I don't need to beat him alone. The truth will." Still, doubt gnawed at her. What if Andrews was transferred, silenced, or forced to withdraw his support? What if her witnesses backed out under pressure? What if the system closed ranks to protect one of its own? The showdown wasn't just against Harlan. It was against a system built on hierarchy, obedience, and silence. The next morning, the showdown began in earnest. A preliminary hearing was scheduled, a closed meeting with senior officers, Captain Andrews and Colonel Harlan himself. Elena was allowed to present her evidence, but she knew the odds were stacked. Harlan would deny everything, his reputation shielding him. As she sat in the stark, cold room, Elena's palms sweated. Across the table, the colonel exuded arrogance, his chest puffed, his decorations gleaming. To the officers assembled, he looked like a war hero, not a predator. The lead officer cleared his throat. "Private Martinez, you've made serious allegations. You will present your case. Elena stood, her notebook trembling slightly in her hands. She spoke clearly, laying out the timeline, the testimonies, the inconsistencies in medical reports. She quoted witnesses, some who had signed statements, others who had been too afraid, but whose experiences aligned perfectly. She described the humiliation she had endured, her voice steady even when her stomach turned. When she finished, the room was silent. Then Harlan laughed. A deep, mocking laugh that echoed off the walls. "This?" he scoffed. "This is what you call evidence? Hearsay, rumors, the ramblings of a disgruntled recruit. She's angry because I demanded excellence, and she couldn't measure up. That's all this is?" He turned to the officers, his voice rich with authority. "Gentlemen, I've served this nation for 20 years. I've bled for it. I've led men into battle and brought them home. And now my career is threatened by the lies of a single private who can't handle discipline." Murmurs rippled around the table. Elena's throat tightened. Was this how it would end, her truth buried beneath his reputation? Then Captain Andrews spoke. "Colonel, with respect, this isn't one private's testimony. It's multiple soldiers. It's patterns. And it's backed by inconsistencies in your own records." He placed a folder on the table. Inside were the signed statements from Jenkins, Rivera, and the young recruit. Medical reports. Training logs. Enough to cast serious doubt on Harlan's defense. The colonel's confident mask faltered for just a moment. His hand clenched into a fist on the table. Lies, all of them. But the officers were no longer looking at Elena with doubt. They were studying Harlan, weighing his anger, his defensiveness. The cracks were visible now. That evening, word spread like wildfire. The inquiry was moving forward. The colonel wasn't cleared. Instead, a full investigation was being launched. Harlan's fury exploded. Soldiers were ordered into grueling drills. Punishments doubled. Tempers flared. He stalked the grounds like a wounded predator, lashing out at anyone who crossed him. But the more he raged, the more the soldiers whispered. Fear was still there, but it was changing, turning into resentment, even defiance. One night, as Elena walked across the courtyard, Harlan appeared, blocking her path. His face was twisted with rage. "You think you've won?" he snarled. "You think anyone will believe a girl like you over me? You're nothing. I built this place. I'll bury you in it." Elena met his eyes, her voice calm but unyielding. "Maybe you built it, Colonel, but you built it on fear. And fear doesn't last." For the first time, he didn't respond. He just stared at her, his breath heavy, his eyes wild. Then he turned sharply and stormed off into the night. Elena stood frozen, her heart hammering. She knew then, the showdown wasn't just beginning, it was reaching its breaking point. The colonel was cornered, and a cornered predator was at its most dangerous. The days that followed the hearing felt heavier than the drills themselves. The air buzzed with tension, sharp and unspoken. Soldiers marched, ran, and saluted as usual. But beneath the strict discipline lay something far more dangerous. Division. Some whispered in support of Elena, their eyes meeting hers with silent respect. Others avoided her completely, fearful of being seen as allies. And a few, fiercely loyal to the colonel, looked at her with open contempt. It wasn't just about one accusation anymore. The base itself had become a battlefield between silence and truth, fear and defiance. Colonel Harlan struck first. Orders came down that Martinez was to be reassigned to the most grueling tasks. She scrubbed latrines until her knuckles bled, carried heavy gear until her shoulders screamed, and was denied rest under the excuse of discipline. But every time he tried to break her, she stood back up. Soldiers noticed. Some whispered, "She doesn't crack. She doesn't bow." Others began to question why their commanding officer spent so much energy tormenting a single private when he had an entire unit to lead. Late one evening, after another punishing drill, Jenkins leaned against her bunk and whispered, "He's unraveling, Elena. People are talking. They're not just afraid of him anymore. They're angry." Elena wiped the sweat from her brow, her body aching. "That's what fear does when it overstays its welcome," she murmured. "It rots." The investigation continued quietly, but quietly was not enough. Harlan was pushing harder, trying to bury the process before it gained traction. Files disappeared. Witnesses reported being pressured. One even confessed to Elena in a trembling voice. "He cornered me. Told me if I backed you up, I'd regret it for the rest of my life." Elena clenched her fists, but stayed calm. "Then don't do it for me," she said softly. "Do it for yourself. For everyone else, he'll hurt if no one stands up." The soldier swallowed hard, torn. But the seed was planted. Captain Andrews, meanwhile, worked tirelessly behind the scenes. He passed Elena updates whenever he could, interviews being conducted, inconsistencies piling up, more and more cracks in Harlan's spotless record. "The walls are closing in," he told her one evening. "But the higher-ups need undeniable proof. They won't act until it's irrefutable." Elena understood. It wasn't just about evidence, it was about courage. They needed more soldiers to step out of the shadows. The breaking point came during a training exercise. The colonel stood at the edge of the field, barking orders with venom. The recruits stumbled through grueling maneuvers, pushed past exhaustion. Elena, though warm to the bone, kept moving, her every step defiant. Finally, a young soldier collapsed in the dirt, gasping for air. Instead of calling for medics, Harlan sneered. "Get up, you worthless coward, or I'll have you running till you puke blood." Something snapped. The other soldiers froze, their eyes wide. It was a scene they had seen before too many times. But this time, they didn't just watch. Corporal Rivera stepped forward, his voice steady. "Sir, he needs medical attention." Harlan's head whipped around. "Did I give you permission to speak, Corporal?" Rivera didn't flinch. "With respect, sir, this is endangering his life." The colonel's face darkened, fury radiating off him. "That's insubordination." But before he could continue, another soldier spoke. Then another. And another. "He's right, sir. The recruit needs help. This isn't training. It's abuse." The field buzzed with voices. Soldiers who had stayed silent for months finally broke their chains. Harlan's face turned crimson. "Enough," he roared. "All of you back in line." But no one moved. For the first time, the fear that had bound them began to dissolve, replaced by something stronger, unity. Elena stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. "We're not afraid of you anymore, sir." A silence that followed was deafening. The colonel trembled with rage, but there was nothing he could do. Too many eyes were watching, too many voices refusing to be silenced. The power he had wielded so mercilessly for years was slipping through his fingers. That night, the base was alive with whispers. Word of the training field standoff spread like wildfire. Soldiers who had doubted Elena now began to believe. Some even approached her quietly, offering their support, their testimonies, their courage. "You gave us permission to speak," one told her. "You showed us we're stronger together," said another. Her notebook filled with new names, new stories. The momentum was unstoppable now. But Harlan wasn't done. The next day, she was summoned to his office. She entered warily, aware this could be a trap. The colonel stood by the window, his back to her, his hands clasped tightly behind him. "You think you've won, don't you?" he said softly, his voice dangerous in its calm. Elena didn't answer. He turned, his eyes blazing. You think a handful of frightened recruits can undo me? I've survived wars. I've stared death in the face and walked away. Do you really believe you can take me down? Elena's voice was quiet but firm. No, sir. I don't think I can. But we can. The colonel's jaw tightened, his face contorting with fury. For a moment, Elena thought he might lash out physically. But instead, he leaned in close, his voice a venomous whisper. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. She met his glare without flinching. You're right. It's not over. But it's the beginning of your end. The following week, the Inspector General arrived on base. An official, high-level investigation was launched, far beyond Harlan's control. Witnesses were interviewed formally, records pulled directly from archives, medical logs cross-checked. The soldiers who had once been afraid now lined up to speak. Rivera, Jenkins, the young recruit. Others Elena hadn't even known were victims. Their voices joined hers, each one adding weight to the avalanche that now bore down on Harlan. The colonel tried to fight back. He blustered, threatened, and denied. He called it a witch hunt, accused Andrews of conspiring against him, painted Elena as a liar hungry for attention. But the more he raged, the more obvious his desperation became. His once commanding presence now looked brittle, even pathetic, under the harsh light of truth. The night before the final hearing, Elena sat on her bunk, staring at her notebook. Jenkins sat beside her, silent for a long while before speaking. You know, Jenkins said softly, months ago, I thought you were insane. I thought there was no way anyone could stand against him. Elena smiled faintly. I thought the same. But fear only works if no one resists. Jenkins nodded. You've changed everything here. Even if they don't admit it yet, you have. Elena closed the notebook and set it aside. For the first time, she felt lighter. Whatever happened next, she knew she had already won something important. She had broken the chains of silence. The next morning, the entire base seemed to hold its breath. The final confrontation loomed, not on the training field, but in the tribunal chamber where the colonel's fate would be decided. Elena dressed in her uniform carefully, every button sharp, every crease perfect. She wasn't just a private walking into a hearing. She was the voice of everyone who had been silenced. As she walked toward the chamber, soldiers stood a little taller when they saw her. Some saluted. Others nodded with quiet respect. The unity she had sparked was no longer whispers. It was visible, undeniable. For the first time in her life, Elena Martinez didn't feel like she was walking into battle alone. She felt like she was leading an army. The tribunal chamber was colder than Elena expected. The air conditioner hummed softly, but it wasn't the chill of machinery that made her shiver. It was the weight of history pressing down on the room. Rows of officers filled the benches, their medals gleaming, their expressions guarded. At the front sat the panel, stern, seasoned leaders who carried the authority to end careers with a single verdict. And at the center of it all stood Colonel Harlan. He was dressed impeccably in his formal uniform, his ribbons meticulously aligned, his posture straight as steel. To anyone who didn't know him, he looked like the picture of discipline and honor. But Elena, and so many others in that room, knew the truth. Beneath that polished surface lay a man who had built his power on intimidation, cruelty, and silence. When Elena entered, the colonel's eyes flicked toward her. They held no fear, only contempt. Yet beneath that contempt, she sensed something else. Desperation buried deep. The hearing began with formalities. Charges were read: abuse of authority, misconduct unbecoming of an officer, dereliction of duty, and multiple counts of harassment. Each word landed heavily, echoing through the chamber like a hammer striking steel. The colonel sat still, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed forward. When asked for his plea, his voice was calm and clipped. Not guilty. The panel nodded, and the testimonies began. Captain Andrews spoke first. He laid out the timeline, the complaints he had documented, the resistance he had faced. His voice was measured, professional, but Elena could hear the edge beneath it, a quiet fury at all the lives Harlan had damaged. Next came Corporal Rivera, recounting the day of the training exercise when he had defied the colonel to protect a fallen recruit. His voice shook at first, but as he spoke, it steadied. "Sir, with respect," he concluded, "what we endured wasn't leadership. It was tyranny." One by one, the witnesses came forward. Jenkins, the young recruit who had collapsed. Others Elena hadn't even known were brave enough to testify. Their stories painted a mosaic of cruelty. Soldiers humiliated, punished, broken down, and silenced. Through it all, Elena listened quietly, her heart pounding. She wasn't just hearing their pain, she was reliving it. Every detail was a reminder of why she had spoken up, why she had risked everything. Finally, her name was called. She rose and walked to the stand. The weight of dozens of eyes pressed down on her, but she stood tall. "Private Martinez," the presiding officer said, "you've been the central figure in this case. Tell us, in your own words, what you experienced under Colonel Harlan's command." Elena drew in a slow breath. For a moment, the memories threatened to choke her, the late-night summons, the endless punishments, the way he had sneered when he thought her powerless. But then she remembered the soldiers behind her, the ones who had found their voices because she refused to lose hers. She spoke clearly, her voice steady. He was more than a commander. He was a shadow over all of us. We were told to obey, no matter the cost. And when we couldn't meet his impossible standards, he didn't teach us. He broke us. He used fear like a weapon, and he counted on our silence to protect him. But silence only protects the abuser, not the abused. I stayed silent once. I will never do it again. Her words hung in the air. Some officers shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded ever so slightly. When she finished, she looked straight at Harlan. His expression hadn't cracked, but his eyes burned with fury. Then it was the colonel's turn. He rose, his voice booming as if he still commanded the training field. "This entire proceeding is a disgrace," he thundered. "I've served this country for decades. I've bled for it. I've led men into battle while these recruits still needed their mothers to tuck them in. And now my reputation is being torn apart by lies and weakness." He pointed a finger toward Elena. This private is nothing but a troublemaker. She's poisoned the minds of good soldiers, turned them against their leader. Discipline isn't cruelty. Order isn't abuse. What you're hearing is nothing more than a smear campaign led by those too soft for military life. His voice rose, filled with venom. "If you strip me of command, you don't just destroy my career, you destroy the backbone of this unit." For a moment, the room was silent. His words carried weight, his voice still commanding. But it was the kind of command born of fear, not respect. And now, in the light of truth, fear was losing its hold. The presiding officer leaned forward. "Colonel Harlan, enough. We will consider your statement. But discipline is not an excuse for abuse. And honor cannot exist without accountability." The colonel's jaw clenched, but he sat back down, seething. The panel withdrew to deliberate. The chamber buzzed with low whispers. Elena sat rigid in her seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Every second dragged like an eternity. Jenkins leaned toward her and whispered, "No matter what happens, you already won. Look around." Elena glanced around the chamber. Soldiers who had once cowered in silence now sat with heads high. They had spoken, and no one could take that away. She realized Jenkins was right. Even if the tribunal faltered, the chains were broken. Finally, the panel returned. The presiding officer stood, his expression grave. "Colonel James Harlan," he began, "this tribunal has reviewed the evidence, heard the testimonies, and weighed the charges. It is the unanimous decision of this panel that you are guilty on multiple counts of misconduct and abuse of authority." The words landed like thunder. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The officer continued, his voice firm. "Effective immediately, you are stripped of your command and rank. You are dishonorably discharged from the United States Army." For the first time, Harlan's composure cracked. His face drained of color, his lips parting in disbelief. "You can't do this," he rasped. "I am the Army." "No," the presiding officer cut him off sharply. "The Army is built on integrity, courage, and service. And today, you have been found unworthy of all three." Military police stepped forward. The colonel struggled, his voice breaking into a snarl. "This isn't over. Do you hear me? This isn't." His words were cut short as he was led away. The door slammed behind him, leaving only silence. The tribunal adjourned. Soldiers filed out slowly, many stopping to nod at Elena, some even saluting her. She returned each gesture with quiet dignity, her heart swelling with a strange mix of relief and sorrow. Captain Andrews approached her. "It's over," he said simply. Elena shook her head. "No, it's just beginning. Now we have to rebuild what he broke." He smiled faintly. Spoken like a true leader. In the weeks that followed, the base changed. Training was still grueling, discipline still firm, but the air was different. The fear that had once suffocated every corner was gone. Soldiers spoke more freely, trusted one another more deeply, and carried themselves with a quiet pride that hadn't been there before. Elena became something of a symbol. Not officially, not with medals or titles, but in the way soldiers looked at her, in the way new recruits whispered her name with respect. She was no longer just Private Martinez. She was the one who had faced down a giant and refused to bend. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold, Jenkins sat beside her on the training field. "You ever think about what's next?" she asked. Elena smiled softly. "All the time. But for now, I think about today. About the fact that we can breathe easier. That no one here has to feel alone anymore." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the past still lingering, but the future stretching wide before them. Elena Martinez never set out to be a hero. She had only wanted justice for herself, for others. But in speaking up, in refusing to bow to silence, she had become something more. She had shown an entire unit that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the choice to act in spite of it. And though Colonel Harlan's reign was over, the lesson he inadvertently left behind was one no soldier on that base would ever forget. The greatest power isn't in rank or medals. It's in the truth, and the courage to speak it.